We answer your mailbag questions, diving into the AFC's moves, JC Tretter draft questions, and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we are here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. We're back. It is a midweek edition here of Locked On Ravens, and we're going to be answering some mailbag questions here today, covering a wide range of topics. We have 3 full segments of mailbag questions here today, and I'm really excited to answer them all. We are going to touch on, again, a bunch of different topics. In the first segment, we're going to look at kind of the AFC's moves and what the rest of the conference has done and how that relates back to the Ravens. In the second segment, we'll go more free agency focus with some players and moves that the team could make and if they should make certain moves. In the final segment, we'll look more towards the draft and look at a couple questions from there. So a lot of great content to dive into today. So let's jump right in. Before we do that, though, if you heard this on YouTube in video form and you enjoy daily Baltimore Ravens content 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Like the video, we hit 1,000 subscribers, and I want to thank everybody who did help me on that journey to 1,000 subscribers and who are now helping me on the journey to 2,000 subscribers. So our next goal here on Locked On Ravens, 2,000 subscribers. It's been great to see everybody kind of coming in during the premieres at 6 a.m. Eastern time and talking in the live chat. That's been fun. And also in the comments as well for some nice discourse in there. So plenty of benefits to video form, also plenty of benefits to audio form. If you're there in audio form, thank you so much for listening in audio form, whether it's on your way to work or wherever you are listening, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're there and available on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstreicher34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into these questions now. And let's start off with 2 questions from Positive Vibes 0611. And his first question is, have our moves matched that of other AFC teams? Do you believe Lamar is not signing a contract because he's watching what the Ravens do with the rosters and Roman? So a lot of mini questions in this one. And so first, have our moves matched that of other AFC teams? Some, but not most. The AFC arms race has been real. The Ravens have made aggressive moves, but they haven't been as aggressive as, trading for a quarterback like the Browns have or the Broncos have. They don't need to make that kind of move. They haven't been as aggressive as teams like the Chargers, who traded for Khalil Mack. They could have made that kind of move, but they didn't. So I'm not going to say the Ravens have made the best moves of the offseason or the Ravens have made the most moves of the offseason. That's just not true, but they have made good moves. And what I've been kind of saying is the Ravens have had a good offseason so far, but they should do more. They should do more. And they could do more as well. It's just a matter of where they want to focus their resources. They still have some guys they could re-sign. They could go out there and sign some players, but I don't necessarily think that the Ravens' moves have matched the AFC, but also they haven't had to necessarily do that. I still think they should make more moves to try to get up to that level. But I mean, just because the Ravens haven't necessarily blown all their draft capital on one player or sent a high draft pick for somebody or signed 3 guys to $70 million contracts doesn't mean they're not making good moves. I do think that they should make some more moves, but teams like the Chargers, I think, have had a very, very good offseason. I think the perception changes a little bit as Zadarius Smith ends up coming to Baltimore, which he actually signed a deal with the Minnesota Vikings yesterday for a little less total money overall. It's more average annual value, but it could be worth up to $47 million, I believe, and it was a 3-year, $42 million contract for Smith with the Vikings. The Ravens contract was 4 years for 35 with incentives up to 50. So more average annual value on less years for Smith. But again, the perception kind of changes if, all right, the Ravens got Marcus Williams and Zadarius Smith as opposed to, okay, just Marcus Williams. And it's not just Marcus Williams. Williams is a great player, but when comparing it to the rest of the AFC, I mean, there are teams out there who have done more than the Ravens, who have improved their initial rosters more than the Ravens, but the Ravens had a very talented initial roster to begin with. and they're also getting back players. So I don't think all hope is lost. I think the offseason has been better than some people think it has, but at the same time, I do think they need to do a bit more just to round out their roster. So I'm interested to see how that works. So the next part of this, do you believe Lamar is not signing a contract because he's watching what the Ravens do with the Rodgers and Roman? I don't think that has a huge part in it, if any. I think this is more Jackson wanting to bet on himself and playing out the rest of the quarterback market, where he has benefited greatly from players like Deshaun Watson and Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford signing those deals. Players like him and Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow have benefited a ton. And the Bills are probably thanking their lucky stars right now they signed Josh Allen when they did, because they're not going to have to pay him that huge amount of sum. And Allen, of course, deserves everything he's going to get. Jackson, same thing. But I don't think it has anything to do with the moves they're making. I mean, maybe there's a slight inkling where Jackson's like, what are they going to do this offseason? But I think it's definitely more of the being confident in himself and betting on his abilities there. I don't think it has to do with the actual organization. He and the organization made clear that they would like to continue their partnership pretty long term. Second question here from Positive Vibes 0611. With all the moves on offense teams have made, do we need to do more on defense? Is it still wise to go after Wagner? And if so, do we do it halfly like usual or fully dive in? I think the Ravens do have to do a bit more on defense. The Zadarius Smith thing, of course, you don't want a player who's not going to want to play for your organization. Like, the Ravens are never going to be beggars, and John Harbaugh has said as much, especially with certain players. He's like, we're not going to beg anybody to come to Baltimore. If you want to play with us, then we're going to embrace you. If you want to go to another team, we'll look forward to playing you on Sundays. It kind of said something along those lines, and I don't think that's necessarily changing here. So the rumors and the reports have been that the Ravens and Smith agreed to a deal. Then Smith wanted to revise the deal, and his agent wanted to revise the deal. They did that. The Ravens accept that offer, and they kind of rework it. Then Smith comes back a third time and proposes a new contract, and the Ravens are like, no, we're okay. We're good. So the loss of Smith, well, he was never on the team, but the loss of Smith is actually pretty big. There aren't really pass rushers on the market anymore up to his level, and the Ravens are probably going to have to invest now a high draft pick in an edge rusher, which isn't a bad thing, but Positive Vibes mentions Bobby Wagner. I think they should 100% go after him. If the Ravens can somehow, some way pull off the trio of JC Tretter, Bobby Wagner, Calais Campbell, it's a wrap for me. I'm giving them an A. That's the ultimate offseason for me for the Ravens, and then they can focus more on the edge in the first round. But I think a player like Bobby Wagner would be a very good addition. You could also look the veteran corners on the market, because their cornerback room right now doesn't have a lot of bodies. So AJ Bouye, Chris Harris, Stephon Gilmore, still, I don't really see that being a fit right now. Maybe it is, but I don't know. I don't see that really being something they could really look at right now. So at the end of the day, I think that the Ravens, they should do more on defense. I still think Wagner is their best option for a pure splash impact player on the defensive side of the ball there. But I think that if they're going to go for it, they should go for it. I don't think they should do it halfway. I think they should dive into it and say, hey, look, we want you here. What do you want? Let's try to work on some terms. And of course, it doesn't work out with every free agent like that. But the Ravens, people are hungry for a move. People want to see another big signing. They can make some money to make a huge splash. I think right now they can make a borderline big splash. And whether they want to go all in for a Wagner, get a Tretter on the offensive side of the ball, I think they are going to sign a couple more outside guys. But who those guys are, of course, we don't know at this point in the offseason and in free agency. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what they do. Our final question here comes from Jamal X for this first segment, who asks, if we still have Greg Roman as offensive coordinator to begin the year, do you think any of these offseason moves matter? Yes, I do think they matter. The Ravens are going to have Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator in 2022, barring something very unforeseen. They've made that pretty clear by not parting ways with him so far. I would be very shocked if they fired him at this point in the offseason. Now, they do matter because I think we have seen success with Greg Roman's offense, but at the same time, it does have to improve and take that next step. It has to take steps. And I'm someone who sees the faults in Greg Roman. I'm also someone who sees the successes in Greg Roman. I don't necessarily blind myself to one or the other. And there are clear reasons that Greg Roman has gotten all this flack and reasons why there have been calls for him to be fired, but there are also clear reasons why the Ravens have kept him. He's had success with the team, but that success has to continue to evolve. And I think the addition of Moses will help. If the Ravens do sign JC Tretter, that's another addition that will do wonders for this offensive line. But I think one of the main reasons Roman is coming back this year is because of the fact that there were so many injuries, and I've said this constantly throughout, even before the season ended, that injuries. It was really injuries, and I think this team really wants to see what they have. And that doesn't mean they're going to run it back with the exact same roster. They've already made changes. Guys have gone out, other guys have come in. But it's reasonable to say, what if? What if J.K. Dobbins was healthy? What if Gus Edwards was healthy? What if Ronnie Stanley was healthy? Et cetera, et cetera. What if Lamar Jackson didn't get injured? The Ravens were dealt such a bad hand on both sides of the ball injury-wise. That was why I didn't expect Don Martindale to get fired. I didn't expect Greg Roman to get fired either, because I thought they would just want to give the guys a chance to say, hey, look, if you can't do this with a fully healthy roster, then we're going to know to move on. But if you can do it, then if we fire you early, that would be a bad thing. So that's where I think that decision came in. I think the offseason moves do matter. It's going to matter whether Greg Roman's the offensive coordinator or not, but I will say I would not be totally surprised if the Ravens get off to a slow start. Well, I should rephrase that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens do get off to a slow start, which I'm not saying they will, but if that is the case, maybe the Ravens start 2-4, 1-4. There might be a scapegoat in that situation, and I think that would be Greg Roman. So if the Ravens do start slow in 2022, I don't expect them to, but if they do, then maybe we're talking about a new offensive coordinator that could be James Urban, T. Martin, maybe Keith Williams, etc., more in-house options. But for now, Greg Roman's the guy in Baltimore on the offensive side of the ball running that offense. I think he can evolve his offense. We saw the pass offense be better with Lamar Jackson actually having time to throw. Obviously, that did not last the whole year. In fact, it didn't last for a lot of the year. But I think we saw steps that I'm encouraged by, and I hope Roman can continue to grow with those steps. But if not, then we potentially could see a change there mid-season. We'll head into our first break, though, here on Locked On Ravens. When we get back, we'll be diving into more mailbag questions surrounding free agency. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a lot to talk about. But first, let me tell you a bit about Built Bar. Now, this time of the year, people are pretty much giving up on their New Year's resolutions, but don't do that this year, especially if you're eating healthy. Do it with Built Bar. And Built Bars, they don't really feel like it's a resolution because they actually are very good. And for the Built Bar Puffs, Built Bar has introduced those. You're really missing out if you haven't tried them yet. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. Really, really unique. They're fluffy and marshmallow, and they're not just a protein bar. They are a treat. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, that also includes the Puffs. They're low-calorie, high protein. They contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Now, flavor-wise, mint brownie is my personal favorite, but they also have coconut, almond, etc. So be sure to go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. Get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. Thank you again for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day. And also make sure you're following Locked On NFL, Locked On Experts, covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And we're going to now dive into even more mailbag questions. And let's start off with a question from QM25. And he asked, the Ravens need to sign JC Tretter at center. If this doesn't happen, what position in the draft do you address this? Also, do you attempt to get Julio on an incentive-based vet deal? So these are two very interesting points, and I agree wholeheartedly with the first one. I think the Ravens absolutely should sign JC Tretter at center. He is by far the best player on the market at that position at this point, and I think it's really him or bust for me. The other guys on the market aren't needle movers. JC Tretter is a needle mover, and I've been very adamant about the fact that the Ravens at this point need needle-moving pieces at key positions. That's not saying they shouldn't sign depth guys, but at starter positions like the offensive line, like center, they need needle movers. Tretter is one of the best pass protectors at the position for years and years and years now. He's a solid player, and they should absolutely go after him. If the Ravens do not sign JC Tretter, QM asks, what position in the draft do you address this? I personally am not as high on Tyler Linderbaum as others. I still think he could be a very solid player for the Ravens. Am I spending pick 14 on him? That might be a trade down candidate for me, in my opinion. I think you can find a solid starter in the mid rounds. I've talked about Cole Strange before. Jamari Salier is someone who could be an option there as well. Luke Fortner out of Kentucky, Alec Lindstrom out of Boston College. There are good mid to late round guys who could potentially step in. But maybe the Ravens have already found their center in Patrick McCary and want to use him there. I personally would use him as a super sixth offensive lineman. I've said that before. But at the same time, maybe they just want to trust their guys here. And they gave McCary that huge extension. And well, I wouldn't say huge, but it was a pretty decent extension for what he was making. And if they want to use him there, they could. Tristan Cologne's another guy who could come in and play that position. But I still think Tretter is the best option by far and would address a position of need, solidify the offensive line, and help build that wall around Lamar Jackson to protect him and make sure he has time to throw. So yes, I am all on board the JC Tretter train for sure. It's a solid move, and it's one that would arguably people like the flashy moves like wide receivers and running backs and tight ends on the offensive side of the ball. And people look at the offensive line and they're like, like that's okay. I don't really care about that. But I personally value offensive linemen quite a deal and think it's very important. It all starts up front for me. And for the Ravens to sign a guy like JC Tretter to pair with Morgan Moses, you would reunite with Kevin Zeitler on the interior of the offensive line. I think it's a no-brainer for the Ravens, but of course it does have to come down to money, to fit, to want. So we'll see what happens there. And the second part of QM's question, do you attempt to get Julio on an incentive-based vet deal? Now, the Julio situation, well, first of all, we've been talking about Julio Jones on this show for I don't know how many months, how many years. It seems like every time he's available, the Ravens' name gets mentioned. But the key difference this time as opposed to last time is the fact that Julio had that huge contract and he would have cost draft capital to get. And where's the fit? Well, you can still argue where's the fit, but 2 of those 3 points, they don't really mean anything anymore. You're not giving up draft capital to acquire him. You're not paying him a huge amount of deal, especially in this situation where QM says a incentive-based vet deal. I think the key thing, if the Ravens were to sign Julio Jones, was to have him understand a role to the point where he would arguably become, well, I shouldn't say arguably, he would be one of the best receivers on the team. He's one of the most accomplished receivers in NFL history, right? He would be a phenomenal player on this team and would be the best receiver on this roster. But it all comes down to him being healthy. And he has not been able to do that over the course of his career. So how can the best receiver on your roster be the best receiver on your roster if he's not healthy, right? That's the key point. So if the Ravens sign him to a minimum deal, there's really no harm, no foul, except in the point that if the Ravens do get rid of somebody valuable to have a roster spot for him, then you're kind of messing with some stuff there. Now, if it's Miles Boykin versus Julio Jones trade-off, who's better? It's obviously Julio Jones. Same thing, even with the young guys, who's better? Julio Jones or Devin Duvernay, Julio Jones or James Prochet. It's Julio Jones. But I think that Jones would have to take a slightly reduced role to get those guys snaps, and that's okay. I'm not saying he's not going to be on the field a lot. He would be. But the Ravens need a big body receiver, can go up, catch contested passes. If they can get a guy like Julio Jones, who is very accomplished, still one of the better receivers in the NFL when healthy, I think that is a no-brainer, but it has to be right fit-wise. It has to be right with what Julio Jones wants. It has to be right with what the Ravens want in development for other wide receivers. A trio of Hollywood Brown and Rashad Bateman and Julio Jones would be very, very formidable. And I think the Ravens should at least look at it and see what would happen with it. But at the same time, if it starts to get up there money-wise, if it starts to get up there in terms of Julio wanting this or wanting that, then you might want to back off. And there are players in this draft who work out in that role, such as Justin Ross, who they could look at. But I think it's important to have a veteran in that room. Julio Jones will signify that. And if he wants to come to Baltimore and play with Lamar Jackson and have that big body role, I would certainly be on board with that, just not at the extensive price that kind of drains the rest of the Ravens cap. So those are 2 really good questions and 2 that address, I think, still needs. Receivers not the biggest need anymore. In fact, you could argue it's barely a need, but I think they still need a pretty big receiver on their roster. So that's a good question there. Next here, though, Nico Seska asks, what's one all-in move the Ravens can make offensively and defensively to help them get closer to a Super Bowl? So this is a really good question. I like this one because people have wanted the Ravens to make that big money signing or the big trade. And the Ravens have made kind of an all-in move on defense with Marcus Williams. But if you were to go defense again, I'll start defense first, then go to offense. Trading for Xavier Howard, I think, would be an all-in move. I think it would be. You're probably surrendering a high draft pick, whether it's a first, a second, etc. You get the 3-headed monster of Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and Xavier Howard. Now, maybe the Ravens would have to move off of Marcus Peters in this situation to save some money. But I think that's an all-in move for them that would solidify their secondary. I mean, imagine a secondary of Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Xavier Howard, Marcus Williams, and Chuck Clark. That is scary. That is scary to think about. The Ravens love their 3 cornerback rotations, 3 really solid corner rotations. They've done it with Brandon Carr and Jimmy Smith and Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith. So to have Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Xavier Howard, It's an all-in move. You're taking on a lot of salary. You're trading some high draft capital. I think that would be a move that the Ravens could make and really say, hey, our secondary was not good last year. We're going to make it better, getting the guys returning and really figuring out what they could do there. Now, my all-in move for offense would be trading for a star wide receiver / running back, but more star wide receiver. The issue is there aren't a lot of guys available right now who could really make that huge impact. I mean, Devontae Adams would have been the pick for me, but he's now in Las Vegas. You could have argued that a Julio Jones trade or an Allen Robinson trade last year would have done it. But I'm going to go a little bold and say that an all-in prediction for the Ravens that might be a bit under the radar is trading for Saquon Barkley. Now, I'm not on board with trading for Barkley, but I think that's one move that would signify all in to say, look, we're going to have the biggest three-headed monster, the best three-headed monster at running back, arguably in a very long time with Edwards and Dobbins and Barkley. The issue is Barkley's contract is not cheap. You'd have to give up something to get him. And you're kind of draining cap into that where the Ravens are saying, look, we have talented young receivers. We want to make sure that we have enough studs at the position of running back. And they do already without Barkley, in my opinion. But I think that would signal an all-in move for the Ravens to say, look, if Barkley can't play 1 week, we'll just feed Dobbins and Edwards. If Edwards can't play the next week, we'll feed Dobbins and Barkley. Like, they can do that with a running back that's not Barkley too, or even like I'd add McCaffrey to this list too, where if they trade for McCaffrey, it's the same kind of thing. But I don't think they need to make that move. I think they could have other additions. I mean, Devontae Adams again would have been like a perfect fit for me, but I think trading for a third star running back would signal an all-in move to me on the offensive side of the ball. But I'd prefer them if they were to make that, maybe trade for a talented offensive lineman or trade for a wide receiver. I think that would be a better move if they were to go we're blowing our salary cap on one guy, and that's what we're going to do there. So those are two big moves for me that could signal all in for the Ravens on defense and offense. And finally, Fee DeFoy asks, I did take French in high school and college. I hope I pronounced that well. Was I good at French? That's a conversation for another day. But the question here, what profile do you think would fit the most for our third quarterback? Well, I think the Ravens have really understood the fact that they can't necessarily sign a quarterback that is a complete opposite of Lamar Jackson, who is not mobile, who cannot make things happen. The Ravens, I mean, what Lamar Jackson did in the Joe Flacco offense in 2018 was pretty phenomenal. And I know the Ravens adjusted it, and like that, yes, that did happen. But when you look at polar opposites, Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson are pretty polar opposites. So to me, a third quarterback, I would have loved Josh Johnson to come back. Maybe the Ravens decide to bring back a Trace McSorley guy, but I think a player who is mobile, good arm strength, someone who can fill in when needed, that's what you need. The Ravens have, I think, prioritized doing that, where they're not signing these pure pocket guys who can't move and can't do all that. I mean, Lamar Jackson has very underrated arm strength, very underrated accuracy, right? He is a good thrower of the football, but also you have to be able to run the RPOs in this offense. You have to be able to motion guys and deal with all the motion and figure that out, be able to create your own offense. And that's something the Ravens value a lot, something their offense is valued on, and something that their offense needs. So if Lamar Jackson were to go down, if Tyler Huntley were to go down, I think to have a player like those two, like we saw with Josh Johnson, Chris Streveler, Trace McSorley, etc., that's the kind of player that you need on your roster to be an insurance policy for Jackson and Huntley. So that's where I'm going with my third quarterback in description, just somebody who fits the offense. You can't go out there and sign somebody who's not going to fit, and then when you need to play them, it's just not a fit because they can't do what you need them to in the offense. You have to adjust it, and then that gets confusing, and it's not worth the headache. So to me, sign a player who's similar to Jackson, similar to Huntley, similar to McSorley, Streveler, Josh Johnson. Those are the types of players you need. So someone who's mobile, good arm strength, good accuracy. Obviously, those are the guys who I think would be the best fit as the third quarterback on the Ravens. But we're into our final break here. When we get back, we'll be diving into some draft-related mailbag questions, so be sure to stay tuned. And we still have a ton to talk about. But first, our next partner has a product that many people use literally every day, and I started looking into Athletic Greens because health is pretty important to me, and having more energy as well, and also the optimized immune system part of things is very important to me. And so Athletic Greens has a lot of those benefits, and people have been using them for a very long time. And it doesn't taste like it's super healthy. It actually has this kind of tropical taste almost. And so the question is now, what's in it? And There are 75 high-quality vitamins. There are minerals, whole-sourced food solutions, probiotics, and a ton more. And also, when you look at it, it contains less than 1 gram of sugar. There are no GMOs, no nasty chemicals, artificial anything. And it also still tastes very good while not having any of that stuff in it. Also, a big part for me, it's very lifestyle friendly. So whether you're vegan, dairy-free, gluten-free, it fits your very healthy lifestyle, whether it is one of those things. And also, it's pretty important to take a multivitamin anyway. And tons of people are doing it, and they're taking some form of a multivitamin. And whether you hate pills or don't hate pills, whatever form you're taking it in, Athletic Greens can be the solution for you. So right now it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with a convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into flu and cold season. It's just 1 scoop of cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens are going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and a 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutrition insurance. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day. We're here 5 days a week. Our next episode tomorrow will be diving into more Ravens content. Of course, we make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And now let's talk about some draft questions here for our final batch of mailbag questions. Let's start off here. Another question from Matthew Seamus, who asks, is David Ajabo still on the table for the Ravens at number 14 with the injury keeping him out until October-ish? And so the injury to David Ajabo, it's a tough one. Torn Achilles, it can be a very tough injury to come back from. And I don't think Ajabo is on the board for the Ravens at number 14. I don't even know if he's going to come back in October. If I'm going to be completely honest, it's an injury. Injury recoveries vary for many different people. You know, it could be different for me, different for you, different from whoever. I mean, Jamal Murray of the Nuggets, sneaking a Nuggets reference in here, tore his ACL last April, and usually those recoveries can take anywhere from, you know, on the short end, 6 months. You know, people kind of view it as a month to a year, or 9 months to a year, excuse me. Murray, it's already almost April, and he hasn't come back yet. It's reported that he's not close. So those injuries, Jonathan Isaac of the Orlando Magic hasn't been back for like a year and a half or 2 years or something crazy. So those injuries can be pretty tough. Ajabo, I think, is a player who the Ravens should invest in the second round, maybe trading up into the second round to get a guy like Ajabo, or maybe at the end of the first round, you want the 5th-year option on him. And he's a player that the Ravens view very highly. I mean, the connection between Ajabo and Mike Macdonald, the Ravens defensive coordinator, I think is very important. So if the Ravens want to have a high upside play in the late first, early second, mid second at their pick, I think they could do a lot worse than Ajabo. I know they need contributors now, but the pure potential of Ajabo makes me think that they could invest in him in the second round. But I still think he's on the table. I don't think it's number 14, though. They need an instant impact playmaker there. I think Jermaine Johnson would be great. Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner. If those guys are there, who knows? They could arguably go in the top 10 or top 12 or something. But for me, Ajabo, off the table at 14, I think it's more of a second or early first round possibility, in my opinion, just because, again, instant playmaker impact. Ajabo, unfortunately, just can't give you that right now. So, you know, my prayers to him, speedy recovery for David Ajabo. But yeah, for now, I'm not taking him at 14 if I'm the Ravens. And finally, let's talk about a question from Darkest Poppy, who asks, what player would you trade number 14 for? And so I'll take this in a couple different directions. I'll go with who I would trade up in the draft for, and then maybe trading back up into the first round for, kind of like an Ajabo type situation. And then even a player I would trade number 14 for, a veteran. So starting off with who I would trade up for in the draft, I mean, there are the obvious players who probably will not reach the Ravens. In fact, pretty much have a 0% chance to reach the Ravens. I mean, yeah, guys like Evan Neal and Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, most likely. Those are the kinds of guys who probably aren't reaching the Ravens at 14. But if they were to reach a certain threshold, and that's where I think it's, you know, if they can hit a certain threshold, and there's a guy like Thibodeau who falls to 7 or 8, and it's like, oh man, like, why is he here? The Ravens could definitely pair 14 with maybe a third and a fourth or a future second or something to move back up and trade up to a couple picks to take a talent like that. Ike Ekwonu, Kyle Hamilton, same thing. Probably won't make it. If they fall to a certain threshold, like 7 or 8, that's where I'm thinking I'm the Ravens. If I'm the Ravens, I'm making a move for one of those guys just because the talent's undeniable. The Ravens don't usually have a pick this high. And if there's a guy who falls for some reason and the Ravens feel comfortable enough with the fit on and off the field in the organization as well as trading capital for that player, I mean, my dream pick for the Ravens at 14 is Ike Ekwonu. He's not making it to 14. But again, if he falls to like 7, I'm trading. I'm trading up for him. So those are the kinds of guys I do that for. So Thibodeau, Ekwonu, Hamilton, Neal and Hutchinson probably aren't making it, but those are the types of guys I would trade up for. And then even lesser trades, like if they want to trade up to 10 to 11 to take Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley, Charles Cross, one of those guys, Jermaine Johnson, Trayvon Walker, those are players they could make a play for if they really have a super, super high grade on one and they only need to give up a 4th and a 5th to do that. They have 10 draft picks. They have enough draft capital to trade up. It's just a matter of how much they want to give up and how much they feel like they need rookies on their roster. If they feel like they need to have 10 rookies or 9 rookies or 11 rookies, that will dictate how they trade up or down in this draft. And then who I would trade up for at the back end of the first round if I'm Baltimore, maybe, trading up for Ajabo. Dax Hill's another player. But I think for me, if I was to trade pick 14 for a player, I'd go back to Xavier Howard. I think Xavier Howard is a fit for the Ravens. They had interest in him before. That's a player who I wouldn't mind trading number 14 for. He's proven to be one of the best in the business. And yeah, I'm all on board for that. Also, if another offensive tackle came available, like a top end offensive tackle, who the Ravens are able to fit into their books, that's another player who I'd be okay with trading for, number 14 for. But I think 14 is so important this year just to have to trade up or trade back for. And if there's a young player who is kind of disgruntled and wants out and is a star already, then you could look to the trade market and say, all right, 14 for a player who needs a big extension or who needs this or that. But I think if you can find a guy to trade up for in the draft who you have 4, maybe 5, depending on the 5th-year option, years of team control on, who can play on that first round salary for 5 years with Lamar Jackson's extension coming up, with some of the other extensions that will need to happen over the next couple of years for the Ravens. That is an area for me where I am fully on board with trading up in the draft at 14, because the talent this year in this draft, there's a lot, and it's pretty arguable that the Ravens will have probably 1 to 3 to maybe 4 guys who they have in their top 14 who fall to them at 14. But if they don't want to risk that, if they don't want to necessarily have a team like the Texans swoop in and take a guy at 13 right before them, they should be aggressive and move up for a guy that they want, because the talent at the top end of this draft is phenomenal. Not every player is going to make it there. They're going to have to figure out which guys they would trade which pick for, and if there are any other additional picks, because it's not just going to be, oh, hey, we'll trade you 14 for 7 and be done with it. No, the Ravens are going to have to attach other stuff on there. But to me, I think rather than trading that pick for a veteran right now, I would trade up in the draft for a talent who they could have on a cheap contract for 4 to 5 years and who can make an immediate impact that way at a position of need for this team. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.